Hello and welcome to This Week in Agriculture, a presentation of the Communications Unit, Ministry of Agriculture. I'm your producer and host, Christopher Holder. On this week's presentation, we bring you a special interview with the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board in the person of the Registrar, Ms. Tricia David. Welcome to this special edition of This Week in Agriculture. The Pesticide Board has been quietly working over the past 2 years, and of course strengthening its legislative arm, the legislative aspect of your operation, which of course is critical to enforcement. But we want to focus in this conversation today on the expanded role of the board. Traditionally, we know you as looking after agricultural chemicals, telling farmers that they need to wear proper protective clothing and so on. But over the last few years, you've been strengthening capacity, more or less, in looking at the other areas of responsibility, looking at areas such as industrial chemicals, mining, the chemicals used in mining, and now we have this wide open area, oil and gas. Let's have you just recap for us the work you've been doing over the past 2 years in terms of getting yourself ready for this challenge that lies ahead.
Well, thanks. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to be having this conversation with you. I think in terms of the work of the board, I think one of the things we've seen over probably the last 10 years is every year our role is expanding. Every year there's always a new frontier in terms of our legislative mandate. So it's still within our legislative mandate, but a new area that we have to step into and begin to monitor and to enforce certain aspects of the legislation. And indeed, I think for the longest time we have been known as the Pesticides Board. And while we're still expanding our mandate, we have not stepped away in any way from the management of pesticides. There are other areas that we're also expanding, even in pesticides management, if we look at agricultural chemicals as a whole. But indeed, one of our more, I would say, newest area of management that we've expanded into is the toxic chemicals aspect of the legislation. And this actually started since 2008. But at that time, implementation was phased. There were certain levels of stakeholder engagement and awareness that needed to happen to indicate, well, that the legislation covers both pesticides and toxic chemicals, and that these chemicals need to now be managed effectively in Guyana. And so there was a phased approach taken in terms of how we approached it. But one of the things indeed that we've seen over the years in stepping into that new area is there's always an expansion of the stakeholder group that we're covering, the sectors we're covering, and the different industries we're covering. Early on, one of the areas that was notably one of the ones we managed was certainly mercury in mining, and now we have alternatives as well to mercury that is being introduced. And so we have been working with the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, the GRA, the EPA, in trying to address the use of these chemicals to some extent in terms of from import to use in mining in Guyana. And in terms of industrial chemicals, those used by, let's say, the manufacturing sectors, that range, we're currently registering these chemicals as well in Guyana, which allows us to have an indication of what they are, the hazards, the dangers they pose, and to be able to effectively house the information necessary for their management in a life cycle approach. Because it's not just when you register it and you import, but it's beyond that stage of the distribution, storage, use, sale, and then ultimately disposal. So one of the first things that we started managing was getting a list, creating that register in Guyana, schedule of every toxic chemical that is imported and used. Interestingly enough, I remember early on when we started looking at what other countries were doing, like, the EU, Canada, some of the more reputable countries in terms of where they are with chemicals management, and we looked at toxic chemicals. We saw tens of thousands of these chemicals being registered and managed by the authorities in those countries. And I thought to myself, wow, are we going to get to that stage when we start registering these products? And effectively, as of December last year, we're already at 3,000 plus chemicals being registered, toxic chemicals that are imported and used by the different sectors. And indeed, as you mentioned, one of the areas that has caused that number now to just be rapidly increasing is the oil and gas sector. It's one of the newest sectors, yes, for Guyana. But what it has also brought with it in terms of how oil and gas works is a gamut of toxic chemicals that are used by the different groups that are here doing that kind of work that they're using in extraction and different processes. And of course, one of the things that quickly had to happen was we had to quickly adjust at the board to the point where we understood that we needed to manage these products as well and to do so effectively. One of the things that has certainly raised as well is at the same time the legislative mechanism to do that. And so one of the things that I know that the board has proactively discussed and has agreed on is that there has to be, even where the legislation is concerned, there has to be some amendments to ensure that all stages are managed and managed properly when it comes to toxic chemicals, and that's including oil and gas. Currently, what we're doing is we're doing the registration of these products. What we also have done is we're working with all the companies, all importers. Once you're an importer, the legislation says that you must be issued with what is called an establishment permit, for example. And that process allows us to ensure that you have the capability, the proper facility for storage, that there is mechanisms in place for transport that meets at least minimal what the legislation requires, so that if there's chemical incidences, not only is the stakeholder equipped, but the board is equipped for that as well. And then, of course, we're looking at storage in a broader aspect of things, because a lot of the chemicals that are used in oil and gas are not already stored here, they're stored offshore and used offshore. So that dimension is something that we have to begin to explore as well in terms of looking at effectively managing it as well.
In terms of building institutional capacity here at the board, what steps have you been taking in terms of expanding your human resource capacity to do all these things that you're now undertaking?
So that's one of I love that you asked that question, because that's one of the key things that we were always very cognizant of, that with every new area of the legislation that's being implemented, with every new addition in terms of stakeholder, that we have to be equipped here. And that is in terms of human resource capacity. And so one of the things and I love the fact that the board is always proactive about, is we always plan in terms of what educational levels then do our staff need to get to deal with this new expansion to toxic chemicals. And one of the things what we've done over the years is we've ensured that the staff that are here, that they're trained at a certain level. We actually have a number of staff that are trained in terms of disaster risk management for both pesticides and toxic chemicals. And one of the programs that we're going to be having them, and there are a number of programs that we tap into as well from the international organizations for which we work very closely with in terms of hazardous materials management as well. One that we're going to be tapping into very shortly is a comprehensive hazardous materials management training. And this will not just be for our staff here, but it's going to be broader. We're going to be coordinating with the EPA and GGMC to kind of have that level of knowledge not only be here, but in other agencies where we think it's relevant as well. But in addition to not just building the institutional capacity in terms of the knowledge in these areas, is also building the staffing capacity. And so that's one of the things that we're always very vigilant of, that we need to increase in terms of our numbers so that we have enough persons. I mean, Guyana is a very large country with a number of different regions. And so, of course, working from a hub, you need to have a number of persons that are on the ground. And so that's one of the things that we're doing as well. In that light, there's an investment that's going to be made come this year, where we're going to be building new administrative facility to allow us to continue to expand mainly the inspectorate department. That's one of the areas that we're looking at expanding. And of course, our lab facilities, one of the things we're doing is we're examining building capacity for testing of these chemicals in different mediums. What we would have done, for example, initially was look at pesticides in food and so on, but of course we're looking at detecting residues of chemicals in water, in soil. So those are some of the areas that we're already thinking of being able to expand into, because we see those as being very important and priority in trying to manage the sectors.
For our viewers to understand the scope of the challenge you face in going into these new areas, let's talk, for instance, about mining. There are a lot of concerns about tailings getting into the waterways with cyanide and all those things. What progress have you made in terms of I don't know, testing waterways for contamination? Are we there yet in terms of being able to effectively do this?
At the board, it's not an area, to be honest, that we have tapped into in terms of looking at, for example, contaminants in waterways from mining activities. But one of the things that we have taken an approach to, and that's going to be something that's big on our work plan for this year, is providing training, and this will be collaboratively with GGMC, to the users of these chemicals in their mining activity, the dangers not only to health but environment. We believe that obviously if there is education, if they're educated and they understand the risk to human health, the risk to environment, and the practices that may make those risks very real, then obviously what we can have is we can have some curtailing of those activities in some instances to reduce the impact that is already having these activities have on our environment and health.
You've been monitoring the importation of some of those chemicals that are used in mining, mercury, perhaps cyanide. What has been your experience in terms of the reality in the ground as it relates to importation and use of these things? Storage, perhaps, is also a consideration of the board.
Well, I love that you asked that question. One of the things that we were able to effectively do, I think it was just about 2 years now, is to develop an MOU with GGMC, the EPA, and GRA. What that allowed us to do was to effectively look at specifically imports, and how do we get Guyana to a place where we begin to reduce the use and the import of mercury, given that the Minamata Convention looks at elimination of mercury totally in mining. And Guyana is a party to the Minamata Convention. And what we've been able to do with that MOU is now there is a quota system in terms of what Guyana would allow in terms of mercury. And in order for that approval to happen, there are a number of agencies that are involved. So the EPA is involved to ensure that even if you're importing, that your practices, your storage, and all those things is not going to impact the environment in any way. In addition, as well, we would do the inspections and the monitoring of your storage facilities, your transport and distribution, because those chemicals are also dangerous to the environment. You don't want to have spills, you don't want to have incidences when you're transporting to the mining areas and so on. And then GGMC, I know, have ramped up their monitoring of the use of these products in the mining areas themselves. So what we've already seen in terms of imports, if I was to look back maybe 2 to 3 years ago, is a mass reduction in the imports of mercury and more movements to alternatives, more movement to mercury-free mining as well. So there is an impact that is happening, but what we have to do, of course, is continue along this vein and to continue to develop initiatives that further bring us to that place where we can eliminate totally the use of mercury in mining.
In terms of industrial chemicals used in Guyana, the chemicals that are perhaps in GPL transformers. Remember, you were alarmed some time ago when you found that these transformers start leaking into the ground and the dangers those pose. Let's talk a little bit about your work in this regard.
So there are a number of companies that are, I mean, Guyana has a lot of manufacturing industries. And we also have state agencies that, because of the kind of work they do, they access different types of chemicals. One of the things we've had to do is we've had to basically take an approach of working with all the companies in batches because the number is so large. And one of the first things we did was, as I mentioned earlier, the regulation speaks to that establishment permit. And under that establishment permit, you have to have all requirements in place for storage, for transport, to facilitate import, to facilitate distribution. Your employees must be trained, must be knowledgeable, must have access to the information on these products. You must have an emergency response plan. You must have a chemical waste management plan. So it was broad, the requirements of that establishment permit. And so what we did was that aspect of the legislation we began to quickly implement to bring these companies in line. Just last year, we targeted 60 companies, and of that 60, we've been able to get more than 75% cross the finish line of being compliant in Guyana, having their establishment permits issued, which means that they have put all mechanisms in place to ensure management of these chemicals throughout the different stages of its life cycle. And we continue to work with even those that are not compliant. Of course, there are certain restrictions that we would place on them to ensure that they go that route of trying as quickly as possible to be compliant to satisfy these different requirements. And of course, what we continue to do with the fact that we're licensing these companies is identify continuously stakeholders that need to be captured in this aspect of managing them for the chemicals they're importing, and then working with them, quickly making them knowledgeable of the requirements, working with them to bring them under the ambit of the law and bring them to a stage where they're compliant as well.
There was an initiative to have some of these hazardous waste, if you like, exported or taken away out of the country. You had some collaborative partnerships in place. Has there been any movement in this? Have you been able to seal any new deals as regards to somebody else taking our waste?
No, we haven't. What we are doing, though, is we're working closely with the EPA, who really is the agency that's responsible for disposal. And we're continuing to look at mechanisms that would allow us to find better ways of managing stocks of unwanted chemicals, be it pesticides or toxic chemicals. And one of those things that we had to move to in 2015, we had this large stockpile of chemicals that had come in and accumulated over the years, and we were able to work with FAO and Jeff to dispose of that. In fact, they ended up taking a total of 21 tons out of Guyana and disposed it for us with external funding. But one of the things that has happened from then is that, as a country, we had to get to a place where we started to think of how do you continue to reduce this stockpile of chemicals that is accumulating a lot of times, and a lot of times it's more from illegal imports or unauthorized imports of materials that then they are unable to register and deal with in a proper manner that you can allow them to have access to it. So you confiscate this material, and then, of course, the stockpile grows. One of the things we've been able to do is establish an MOU with GRA. And effectively, one of the things we've been trying is to have importers, when they bring unauthorized materials or unregistered products, is to have them reship it to the country of origin. And we've had a couple of such cases in the last year, and we were able to effectively work with GRA and the importers to have that material reshipped, rather than it becoming something that is adding to a stockpile that then you still have to figure out a disposal mechanism for.
All right, one of the areas you've worked very hard over the years to expand and improve in terms of capacity and capability has been your laboratory. It was on one side only, but now you have it coming all the way around and then around again. And now you have the capability to do a whole lot more in keeping with your mandate. You've recently added the fertilizer laboratory, which is something that I think farmers have been calling for the longest while, to determine the composition of fertilizer, ensuring that it reaches it's in conformity with the whatever's written on the bag and so on. And though some of the bags ain't got anything written on it. But so your laboratory capability has been significantly boosted. Just walk me through all the upgrades you've had put in over the last few years.
Wow. Quite a bit. First of all, one of the things we recognized was with the laboratory capabilities, one of the things we needed was to be certified. And that led to a lot of infrastructural changes. That was one of the first things that we had to do. As you know, there are certain international standards for laboratories. And we started working with the Guyana Bureau of Standards, who visited, conducted a number of audits, and then basically said, with the current facility you have, you cannot be certified to do the work that you want to do. So we had to step back and then say, well, certainly we need to have a lab. That's one. We need to have a lab with certain capabilities. But we also wanted a certified lab so that when the results that are generated from the lab, they can be authenticated, or they can withstand scrutiny, even in courts, in the legal system. And so we then was able to get the commitment from government to the expansion of the facility to allow us to have the infrastructure in place so we can be certified. One of the other things that we had to do was we had to look at equipment. These equipment that are used for pesticides and the residues and fertilizer, they're very large and very expensive. So there was another commitment, the investment to be made in that regard. And what we had to do was we had to upgrade what was there. Initially, when the lab was built, there was just two pieces of equipment, and these equipment have probably about a 10-year lifespan. And so we had one that was already at the stage of going out to be decommissioned. Basically, they wasn't able to be used further. And so we were able to procure new equipment, specifically looking at the area of residue. And what we did was we continued to work. One of the key areas we quickly worked on and having the lab certified was pesticides themselves, as you mentioned, quality of the products that are coming in, not just pesticides, but even fertilizers, and the importance to ensure that what is stated on the labels. And yes, you mentioned some of the fertilizer bags not having labels, but these are areas that we are committed to support because, as I mentioned, the board has that inspectorate arm and we can support in these areas. So these are things we're going to do in the middle as well when we start monitoring the fertilizer, not only at quality, but we're going to monitor storage and we're going to monitor the labeling requirements to ensure that they're adequately labeled and so on, so that when they're purchased, you can clearly understand what's in there and the standard that is set on the label is met in terms of quality. So we quickly looked at pesticide products because that was an area of concern. That the registration process looked at the scientific data. Being able to test the products would allow you to look at, to examine that, okay, what the data gives you is what you're getting in terms of the product itself, and then obviously its effectiveness against pests in field. And so that was the first area that we were able to get certified in, but works in that in each of these areas are continuing. So currently, annually, we're adding our capacity to even the pesticides that we're analyzing. And this is because every year you're also registering new products and you're registering new active ingredient. And so we're constantly building capacity to add the list of products that we can analyze. In terms of residues, and this is one of the areas that we're hoping in a couple of months from now that we can also have certified facility to look at pesticide residues in rice and other crops that are grown here locally. And that's because what we want to ensure is also, you heard a lot from, you probably heard a lot from the minister about the farm to table aspect. And so it's not just producing, but producing food that is wholesome and of a good quality. And that means that it doesn't have residues inside. And so that lab is expected to support that aspect of our agriculture sector significantly. Then we also have the food safety bill, which would have, which has in it some ambit of monitoring for food in terms of its quality. So our lab is aimed at also supporting the implementation of the food safety bill when it comes to pesticide residues. In 2017, the GRDB and the Bureau of Standards wrote the board and said, can you build capacity for fertilizer and monitor it in terms of the quality? This was something that I know the Ghana rice industry was very much concerned about. Farmers would oftentimes raise this. Everywhere you go in the field, you'll hear a lot of complaints to that. And the Bureau of Standard had done some work and they were trying, but basically they handed over the mandate and said, well, this is your area. And, we're asking you to build capacity. We quickly got a commitment from government to, one, to create the lab, then to equip it, and of course have our personnel trained. And that's why I said when it comes to building HR, human resource capacity here, is something that is constant. It's something that's always ongoing because we're always stepping into new areas and we always have to ensure that the staff are equipped. So we had one staff who we sent off to go and get her degree and to study further. And we had others, also trained by specialists in this field of fertilizer analysis on the equipment that we now had. And so within a couple of months, they were able to work. And one of the staff who went off in training already actually did as her thesis a research into some of the fertilizers that are imported and looked at the quality at the time of import. And so we were able to build that capacity, and then we were able to have it examined by the Bureau of Standards and then effectively certified. But one of the things that we're doing, of course, already too, is building additional capacity. So a lot of times what you find is the fertilizers, apart from main ingredients, you call them macro ingredients, there are a lot of micro ingredient or micronutrients that are in it. And so what we're already doing, and this year already, is we're going to add to that capacity that's already there, so that we're going to be able to do a broader range of analyses in terms of fertilizers that are imported and used. So that's why I said it's interesting, because we're always in that place where we are expanding our role and expanding what we're doing, but at the same time, we also have to ensure that we're expanding the human resource capacity to address these areas as well at the same time.
Minister has been talking repeatedly about the aim of his ministry to have our farmers not only sell locally, but to access markets in the region and beyond. Critical to this will be your ability to certify that these foodstuff are free from residue from pesticide use or any other chemicals that they may have used. But for those results to be accepted internationally, you would have to be regionally certified. You've been certified to some extent by the Bureau of Standards here. Speak to that concept, your ability to certify our produce as good for our regional brothers and sisters to consume.
So one of the things that would allow us to do that is accreditation now. The Bureau Standards ISO certification or their national certification that allows you to be certified within your country. But accreditation is what would allow you not only regionally but internationally to be recognized. And so that's on the agenda for 2021. And we're looking at achieving it before the end of the year. So we've been making provisions continually along the way to get ourselves to that place. And at this junction, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but we're almost there. So we're looking to cement that for 2021 and add that to the services that we can offer to our agriculture sector. Accreditation that would allow us to be recognized regionally, internationally.
So now that we've established capacity in the part of the pesticide board, let's bring it home to our farmers and the importance that they need to pay to following the instructions on the labels of the chemicals that they use. In all of your PSAs, you've urged farmers, read the label first before you mix the thing. Make sure you don't put extra, make sure you don't put too little bit of the chemicals that are intended for your crops. So how do you propose to move forward in this regard? We still hear of farmers who don't know to read, obviously. The national standard apparently is a rum cork full. You throw them in there and you're good to go. Let's speak to this for a moment.
Okay, so one of the things that ministers highlighted since taking office is the need indeed for farmers to continually be educated as to correct practices when using pesticides and if we're going to be specific agrochemicals. And one of the things we've done over the years since 2008 is extensive training countrywide. But what we've had to do is we've had to now innovate or relook at our training techniques. And so 2021, although we have COVID and we're dealing with working, of course, in that setting, is going to be a year where we relaunch a lot of our training and awareness activities, but from a different standpoint of providing more practical training, more hands-on, so more come and to do and to learn from that aspect than more classroom setting for the farmers to ensure that there is that understanding. It is key that farmers certainly understand that their practices is going to impact ultimately their ability to trade in certain produce or even to sell at the local level and then of course regionally, internationally, because obviously if you're going to use pesticides overuse or misuse, you're likely to have residues that then can affect your produce being acceptable for the local market or even for trade to other countries. And so that's one of the reasons why it's important that at this junction it's not just the understanding for them as to what is correct practice, but they have to understand the basis on which this has to become something that they do daily. because now there will be the facilities to monitor. And there are legislation in place to actually ensure that these standards are met. And obviously, if they're not met by you, the farmer, then I'm sure there are also provisions for certain penalties to be instituted. And I don't think that's what any farmer wants. Nobody wants to know that they spend and make an investment, they spend money, and they have a crop in the ground, and then your residue levels are high that you cannot access even our local markets, and you have to leave that there to rot or anything like that. So I think that's one of the things that farmers need to understand now, that there is going to be a strict monitoring in terms of their use practices. But in that vein, also one of the things that I know one of the other agencies is looking at is farmer registration. And with that, we are the board as well as looking at ensuring that farmers are certified in their practices as well as to how they use pesticides. It will be a large undertaking, but we're committed to trying to start that process this year and move forward from there as well.
As it is right now, a farmer can spray his crop today, and somebody come this afternoon and say, "Yo, I need 1,000 pounds of sweet peppers or whatever," and he said, "What a spray today?" I said, "No worry with that. There's no way a consumer can know that it was sprayed the day before and then taken to the market." But in the meantime, you've been encouraging the use of less poisonous chemicals, more use of biologicals. Let's talk a little bit about what alternatives are available or have been coming in. I know Caribbean Chemicals, they always tout this organic pesticides that they are bringing. And I know some of the other Agroin and ULP or URP, whatever is the name. Let's talk a little bit about this shift to.
Well, I love that you asked that question, because I think I started earlier by saying even in the area of pesticides management, we're expanding. And so one of the things that has happened over the years, and this is on the international scene, is the identification of highly hazardous pesticides. And these are pesticides that are very toxic in terms of their impact on both human health and environment. And so what countries have been doing, including Guyana, is identifying those chemicals on our list in terms of what is approved for import that meets those criteria and satisfied to be listed as a highly hazardous pesticide. And one of the things that we've actively started in terms of phasing those out is to look at what alternatives are available and how do we reduce the use of these HHPs. That's one of the first things we've looked at. And to do that, what we began to do was effectively encourage the registration of what are called biopesticides, or pesticides that are more organic in nature. Things that are coming from like neem, sesame seed oil. You have quite a few of them already registered, and I'm glad if you mentioned a few of the companies, but there are some others as well. And what they've been doing, and what we did previously as well, was establish a standard that would allow them to be able to register these products and have them available on the market. And so now we're having quite a few companies that have gone that route, that have already registered, and we continue to encourage others to do so. And what we've done is we try to make the process one that allows them to have access quickly to being able to get their products registered without, of course, watering down the legislation in any way, but that we have more of these products available on the market. And what we've also encouraged these companies to do is, I know a lot of them have agronomists in the field and PR persons that would normally promote these products. Some of them go directly to the farmers and work with them to show them how these products can work, how they would be as effective as another product that may be highly hazardous, and then even shows them the economics of it, the feasibility of the switch. So to allow us to have more buy-in on the ground. And that's one of the things that I want to encourage farmers to do. You know, you mentioned applying a pesticide today and picking tomorrow, and the label might have said you need to wait 3 days or 21 days before. With the organics, there are some products that you can apply within 24 hours. We're able to harvest without there being any residues above what is the acceptable limit. And that is why, you know, we're encouraging farmers to begin to look at this as a more an area for them to more, you know, begin to think of investing in and to engage in the use of these products even more.
But your ultimate goal, though, while you're appealing to good sense and morality and so on, don't poison the people and so on, you will be able to test for this
Correct.
at some point. You'll be
Correct.
able to
Correct.
as part of I think one of the pieces of legislation that is required for access to regional and international markets is a phytosanitary legislation, which allows a consumer in Barbados, if he buys a product, he can follow it all the way back to the farm it came from. So in case he finds anything messed up there, he can ban that particular farm. So I think that kind of culpability, perhaps, the farmer being aware of the fact that if you do stubbornness,
Correct.
you will pay the consequences. All right. So that is something we can look forward to. I mean, the pesticide board.
We said that we wanted to do our training from the standpoint of making them aware now, so that you understand that you need to begin, train your mind, get yourselves in line where you can understand the change as a farmer that I need to make in terms of my pesticides that I use, even the selection of the pesticides, because one of the things that you don't want to have happen to is you don't want to find a chemical that's not authorized to use in a particular crop in that crop. So, and a lot of times these are things that you have farmers to understand. I have a pest problem. I want to kill that pest, and the thing I'm using doesn't work. So I decided to step outside of that and buy something that is not authorized for use in that crop. Even that in itself, if you find residues of that product, can cause you to have severe penalties or even be blacklisted and all of that. Have your produce not available on the market locally or being able to export as well.
One of the steps you took was to place on a special list what you refer to as restricted chemicals. That list is there, and one of the chemicals in that list is monocrotophos. Recently, in my programs with Hope Estate, apparently monocrotophos is what they want to use for the management of the coconut beetle. But a strange thing happened the last time we were there. In that the farmer was requesting, complaining bitterly, Nari no one give you no monocrotophos and so on. But you'll explain how monocrotophos is managed, because not everybody could go and grab it. You can't go buy it. You're not supposed to go buy it at the shop at the corner. But this guy explained to me at great length that he was using the monocrotophos to kill birds and snakes and rats that bother his rice field. So what he does is soak some paddy in this monocrotophos and put it in little bowls around his farm. I'm sure that's not the intended use for you're killing off the poor birds. Let's talk about your restricted chemicals, and in so doing incorporate some of these alarming practices by our farmers.
Yes, there are 6 chemicals that are have been gazetted as restricted use pesticides. That's because of their toxic nature and also because of the way they may be used. Some of them, for example, are used in self-poisoning or suicides as well. And so one of the things we've done in terms of making them restricted use is that they follow a different line in terms of their management or in terms of how persons access it and then how they use it. And so indeed, monocrotophos is one such product. And this just recently engaged the board of directors' attention the last meeting we had in December, stemming from a similar incident, I should say. But monocrotophos in Guyana is only allowed to be imported by NARI, and it's really for use only by in the coconut industry, basically. One of the things that we have done just last week, was it last week or was it this week? I think it was last week Friday. We had a meeting with NARI where we had to enforce the policies as it relates to restricted use pesticides and how they ought to be managed. And so I can certainly assure you that they're not going to be used the same way. They're not going to be distributed the same way. They're not going to be available the same way anymore either. Effectively, what we've also encouraged is we are going to be the ones, our inspectorate are going to be the ones that monitors NARI's storage, use, and access, and how these products are even used when it comes to treating coconut trees for the coconut beetle as well. So one of those things that we've enforced is that the extension agent will be the one who does the application. So the excess that the farmer may have to try to do what he said he does with it would no longer be something that they would be available to any of them, actually.
So you won't let the farmer actually use
No,
it himself.
no.
So you take away the extras when,
Correct.
you're leaving.
Correct.
For the other chemicals, I think Gramoxone is one of those
Correct.
on it.
Paraquat, yes.
Yeah.
Paraquat dichloride.
So when you go to the farm, at the level of the pharmacist, well, the shop owner,
The vendor, yeah.
the vendor, whoever is selling, and they have to be licensed to do that.
Correct.
What is his understanding of what happens with chemicals that fall
That are
under this
restricted
thing?
use. Okay, so for restricted use pesticides, there has to be record keeping as to, first of all, what stocks you have, and then who purchases. But it's not just who purchases, but the person that is purchasing has to be a farmer authorized to use that product for the specific pest, for the specific crop, for example. And that's why I mentioned, for example, it's one of the things that so currently one of the things they do is they would have to take their ID card. And we've also tried to work with NARI's list of farmers that they would have had to provide some amount of information to vendors that they could have used. But what we were looking to do effectively starting this year is to authorize them ourselves, in that they would come in and get registered. And of course, for that process, we would have to collaborate with sister agencies like NARI to ensure that, yes, they're a farmer, they're farming what, crop and what's the magnitude of their farms. And then they would go through registration process and actually be issued with, like how you get a driver's license with a card that would authorize you to be able to go to the vending site and then access pesticides. So that's one of the things that we want to start doing come this year.
All right. So some significant time has passed since we started talking. So looking forward to the first quarter of 2021, what are some of your priorities?
Wow. One of the things we always say to the board is hit the ground running, because there is so much in terms of that needs to be done in terms of the board's mandate. There is certain aspects of our work that are routine. In terms of that, the legislation is effectively implemented for those areas, and you're just monitoring. But there are other areas that effectively needs to quickly get to a certain stage where you have a handle on things. And I can say in terms of priorities, the lab is one on our agenda. That's very high on the agenda. In terms of the actual enforcement on the ground, storage and transport of toxic chemicals is one of our main priorities as well. And that is going to be coupled along with a lot of public awareness in terms of training.
But what do you want to see in this regard, the storage and transport of?
What we would like to do, certainly as I mentioned, of that, some of your 3,000 plus chemicals, toxic chemicals, and climbing, what we'd like to effectively do is ensure that all the stakeholders who are accessing these chemicals satisfy the regulations and have the relevant storage facilities, meets all the different aspects of what is required in terms of their transport. Transport notifications, for example, is something that we're going to be coming, down very heavy on the stakeholders for. If you want to move chemicals above a certain quantity, the board must be notified. We must be notified who's the driver, what vehicle is using, what's his route he's going, what quantities he's carrying. The vehicle that you use must be equipped with certain safety elements in terms of a fire extinguisher, things to spill cleanup, that kind of thing. And these are important because should you have a chemical incident along your route, let's say you have a spill or you have a vehicle that topples and we need to know right away what was in that vehicle, where his route was, so that you can effectively respond to something like that. And so that's something that we do have some of the companies that are abiding at this junction by the requirements and are submitting their notifications, but we have quite a few that are not, and that's one of the areas that we're going to be enforcing as well. And as I mentioned, there are certain penalties that we're going to put in place to help them to understand that you need to get to this level where you're beginning to satisfy all these additional requirements as well.
Storage, of course, is also going to play a big
Storage
role
is
because
very
that
big.
affects the life of the product.
Correct. Storage is very big, and one of the, one of the main parties we're going to be working with in 2021 is Exxon and all its subsidiaries as well. So we have quite a few, importers of chemicals that meet the needs of Exxon in terms of the oil and gas sector. And we've worked with those that are here in onshore, in Georgetown and these areas. but we need to begin to look at the movement of these chemicals from here to offshore, and then its storage offshore, its use offshore, disposal of the empty containers. These are all areas that we're going to be examining as well. So there's a lot to be done. As I said, one of our things we say is hit the ground running, because you've got a lot to get done, and one of the things we want to do is try to meet all those needs and fill those gaps. Obviously, what that just lends to is better chemicals management for Guyana, and that's what we want at the end of the day, sound chemicals management. We want to know that, yes, these chemicals, we have to access them for different reasons, different sectors, for development, but we want to know that when that happens, that human health, environment is protected by the chemicals management practices that we have here, and that the stakeholders recognize that, they respect it, and they fall in line with the requirements of the law.
Tricia, I want to take this opportunity. Thank you very much for sitting with me and bringing us up to date in the important work of the Pesticide Board. I know you've indicated that we'll be meeting more often as we seek to keep the public informed about the work of the board, but more so now the services offered by the Pesticide Board. It's my understanding that you are going to be outsourcing, and people can come and access your service for a fee and have stuff sampled and analyzed and pay a nice, reasonable fee.
Correct. And we'll do monitoring in the middle, even for the fertilizers, for example. The importers would have to access their initial testing to verify that the quality of the products, the standard. But the board will do monitoring in the middle too, because we recognize how storage practices can impact the quality of some of these chemicals as well. So the board is going to be doing monitoring in the middle with these stakeholders as well.
All right. Thank you very much once again. And to those of you at home who've stuck with us over this past 45, 50 minutes or so, as we brought you up to date in the work of the board, and how you, as a farmer, perhaps, if you're a farmer looking at us, you can play a role in ensuring that you safeguard your livelihood. Because you put the thing wrong and you get tested and found to be over the limit in terms of residue, then you're sucking salt, as they say. So, thanks for watching yet again. This has been another edition of This Week in Agriculture. It's certainly been a pleasure bringing this program to you. This Week in Agriculture is brought to you in association with the Ministry of Agriculture's Communications Unit and the various agencies of that ministry. I'm Christopher Holder. Until next time then, be good to yourselves and to each other.
This is what a responsible, health-conscious person should be wearing when using agrochemicals on the farm. Wearing the proper protective equipment guards users of pesticides and other harmful chemicals from the cumulative effects of consistent exposure over a period of time. In the short term, exposure can result in skin or eye irritation, rashes, burns, respiratory problems, etc. Long-term results of exposure to harmful chemicals include certain types of cancers, birth defects, etc. Ensure you wear the proper protective equipment when applying pesticides. A message from the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board, Ministry of Agriculture. The Guyana Rice Development Board is reminding all farmers that an integrated pest management program is the best way to ensure a successful, high-yielding crop. Integrated Pest Management, or IPM, is the use of several compatible control strategies to suppress a pest. IPM is for the management of all insect pests and snails or even weeds, whether it's early season, mid-season, or late season. This program begins at land preparation and involves the following key steps. After proper tillage, leave land exposed to sun for a few days to allow for pests in the soil to be exposed to natural predators, as well as to allow for degradation of any debris there. Proper land leveling should also be ensured. Farmers should adopt uniform times of sowing. Sowing en bloc during the April, May, and November, December periods of the year. All farmers should treat their seed before sowing, providing insect pest protection to the young rice plants for up to 30 days. Ensure proper water management for the first 40 days of the crop. Ensure effective monitoring of the crop from the vegetative stage for the presence of paddy bugs or other pests. This will aid the farmer in determining the right time to apply the appropriate insecticide to kill the paddy bugs. A message from the Guyana Rice Development Board, Ministry of Agriculture. The Guyana Livestock Development Authority (GLDA) is reminding the general public that its range of services can be accessed from all 10 administrative regions of Guyana. These services include regulatory services such as the issuance of permits for the import-export of live animals, meat, veterinary drugs, hatching eggs, etc., and the granting of licenses for the trade in animals and animal products. These regulatory services also include quarantine for live animals, inspection at ports of entry, and livestock product facilities. In addition, GLDA provides services in the area of artificial insemination in cattle, small ruminants, and swine, livestock management, pasture development, beekeeping. The GLDA Veterinary Laboratory offers diagnostic services including testing for internal parasites, screening of blood and other tissues for the presence of diseases such as avian influenza, infectious bronchitis, Newcastle disease in poultry, and brucellosis, rabies, etc. in other animals. To access these services, contact the GLDA veterinarian or extension officers in your region or the head office on 220-6556 or 220-6557. A message from the GLDA Ministry of Agriculture. The National Agricultural Research and Extension Institute offers specialized services to Guyana's crop farmers. We conduct research and provide extension and quarantine services to ensure Guyana's food and nutrition security, sustainable agricultural development, and income generation for our farmers. We assist farmers to adapt climate-smart technologies, and at a subsidized cost, farmers could now purchase shade plastic, shade mesh, and irrigation sprinklers to avoid crop loss from the effects of climate change. Our organic soil enhancers are inexpensive and a viable alternative to imported brands. Farm certification, import and export permits for agricultural commodities, soil testing, pest and disease management, among other services, are provided free of cost. Farmers can access quality planting citrus material at our 9 plant nursery locations. We are working with Hope Estate and other stakeholders to resuscitate the coconut industry. For more information, visit our website or call us on telephone number 220-2841, 220-5730.